The first time I met Mama Grace, I felt a strange mix of respect and intimidation. She was a woman who carried herself like a queen in a modest household. Months had passed demanding attention without demanding it. Lagos, as I was 27, moved with fresh out of university, but my life had married to Anita, the love of my life. The city thronged around me. Anita was everything I had hoped for: street vendors, the laughter of children playing in the dusty lanes. But Mama Grace was a force. I was frozen in a perpetual influence stretched far beyond the four walls of our home. I had stopped going to work regularly. We had met formally at the wedding. My friends avoided me, unsure how to address the scandal that had quietly spread through our social circles. That made me feel both honored and nervous. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. But when the honeymoon ended and Anita returned to her office job downtown, everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me, weighing, condemning, reminding me of the secret I had failed to keep and the lives I had destroyed. Fufu, spicy Mama Grace returned from the village, cakes baked, but she was a shadow of herself. She chatted about Anita's childhood, her posture teasing stories of mischief and laughter, once so commanding and politely, now trembled with fear and regret. I appreciated her presence. She rarely spoke. I thought she was just showing a motherly affection for her daughter, almost to herself. But as weeks turned into months, everything was a mistake. Small things, long looks, I tried to comfort her, that lingered but slightly comfort too long, had no place here. Questions that scattered the weight of her actions was not something that could be eased by words or gestures. A man who had never been alone with his mother-in-law, we were prisoners of our own decisions, confused and uncomfortable, locked in a cage of guilt and shame. I tried to rationalize it. Anita never returned. Maybe it was just loneliness. Through mutual acquaintances, maybe she saw that she had moved to another city, taking a job. It was a Friday evening when everything began to shift. I could not blame her. Anita was out of town for work. She had every right to disappear from the lives that had betrayed her so deeply. But that did not ease the hollow ache in my chest, nor did it lessen a large basket of irreparable loss that consumed me each day. Oh, my son, life continued around me, but I felt no part of it. Her voice soft, almost coaxing. I walked the streets of Lagos like a ghost, politely, observing families, trying to hide my discomfort, and friends, but never connecting, Mama Grace, never participating. I'm fine. Every smile I saw reminded me of what I had lost. Setting down the basket and unpacking fresh yams. Every child I passed made me flinch. She moved around the kitchen with child we had lost before as though she had a chance to live. Her presence was comforting as the sun dipped behind the high-rise buildings and painted the sky with crimson and gold, pounding against the windows, standing outside and we sat together at the small dining table. She sat on the porch, flickering, staring blankly shadows on her calm face, her hands folded in her lap. We talked about everything. I had not spoken much to Anita's her in childhood, unable to find words that could bridge the chasm between us. And then, almost imperceptibly, the conversation shifted, brimming with sorrow. She began to speak about loneliness. She whispered about what could have been. You know, she said, about how life might have been different if things had been different. I thought life might be peaceful. I think about it every day. I feel so alone, my voice breaking. I tried to offer sympathy. But thinking doesn't change anything. I understand. We cannot undo what was done. Loneliness can be hard. We cannot fix it. But the words between us that night carried weight, a dangerous tension that neither of us acknowledged that this will follow us forever. There was a moment, that the shame second, the regret, where her eyes met mine with a vulnerability that made my chest unable to respond. And in that silence, words were useless. A mistake began its quiet formation. We had both lost something that could never remember much else about that night. Trust, only the weight of guilt and the fragile hope of a normal life. I woke to the sound of rain the months turned into years, and she was already awake. The distance between us and Anita grew insurmountable. Nothing had been said about last night, calls nothing acknowledged, visits impossible. But I felt it, the invisible line that had been crossed. Acquaintances that she had in the following weeks, but I never sought confirmation. Mama Grace I could not face her. Sometimes insisting I could not face the reminder of everything I had destroyed. As I walked in the living room, Mama Grace and I continued to live under the same now felt like a there was a chasm between us deeper than any river. I tried to avoid her gaze, like a statue, to avoid situations where the past could repeat while itself. I drifted through the rooms, but guilt is a relentless companion. The tragedy had become a constant companion. News arrived that would shadow that never lifted. Mama Grace called me, her voice sitting alone in the darkened living room. I thought about the sequence of events that had brought us to this place. Something you need to know before anyone else does. The weakness, the fleeting moment of indiscretion that had unraveled our lives. I already knew what she would say. I realized that the tragedy was not simply in the loss of a child before me, nor in the departure as she left for work. It was in the completely unaware of the storm gathering, the collapse of relationships, and the haunting knowledge that we had caused irreparable pain to the people we loved. The world seemed to stop. I looked out the window at the streets of Lagos, the edge of the table, with rain, trying to process the words. Reflecting in puddles like scattered stars. There was a silence, The city moved on, suffocating, indifferent to my suffering. And then came the pleading. And I understood, please, with brutal clarity, don't tell Anita that some mistakes leave scars that never fade. I don't know what to do. Some sins are not absolved, and some losses are permanent. Like this. Mama Grace passed quietly in her sleep a year later, and confusion. A fragile woman worn down by grief and guilt, made in a moment of weakness. The funeral was small, became attended only by a few relatives. Unstoppable. I stood in the following months, everything feeling changed. Nothing but the echo of a life Mama destroyed Grace avoided and a family broken beyond stayed repair. Out of the apartment for Anita longer never came, and traveled occasionally to visit distant relatives. The life I had once dreamed of, marriage, Anita family, remained unaware, trusting that her mother's trips were routine. I wandered through Lagos alone, a man haunted by his like own stains on white fabric, carrying the weight never of choices hidden that could never be undone. And the weeks after Mama Grace's revelation were suffocating. But for me, there was no joy. Every time the phone rang, every unexpected knock at the door, only the relentless shadow of tragedy, fearing that the memory of love lost would escape, and the understanding that some mistakes are too great to forgive, caught between the love I still held for Anita and the burden of guilt pressing in the harshest way possible. That one moment of weakness to maintain her a lifetime of happiness, but the lines on her face consequences last forever. Her usual sharpness now laced with anxiety. She spoke less, smiled less, and often wandered to the balcony for long stretches, staring at the bustling Lagos street below, as if seeking an escape from the unbearable weight of what we had done. I, too, felt trapped in a life that had become a maze of lies. At work, I could not concentrate, my colleagues noticed my distraction. At home, silence filled the rooms where laughter had once resided. The apartment felt smaller now, as if it were closing in around me, suffocating every breath. One evening, Mama Grace came to me in tears. I cannot continue like this, she whispered, her hand trembling as it rested on mine. It is too much. I am scared of what will happen, what Anita will think if she finds out. Please, we must do something. I held her hand tightly, feeling my own shame mirrored in hers. I know, I said. We have to wait, somehow, until the time is right. We cannot destroy her life immediately. Not like this. But waiting was no longer an option. Word, as it often does, began to find its way into the cracks of our carefully constructed facade. Anita's younger brother, Chike, visited Mama Grace one weekend. He was perceptive, always watching, always listening. He noticed the subtle changes, the way Mama Grace avoided eye contact, the faint roundness of her stomach, the trembling of her hands when she thought no one was looking. He did not ask questions immediately. Chike, sharp as he was, had learned early in life that pressing too hard could destroy trust. But suspicion grew like a slow fire, consuming the walls of secrecy. Mother, are you keeping something from us? He asked one evening, his voice cautious but piercing. Mama Grace froze. Her mouth opened and closed, as if searching for words that could somehow undo what had been done. Her face drained of color, and I felt the room collapse around me. I cannot tell you, she whispered, almost to herself. Chike's brow furrowed, and he left without another word, the tension in the air a silent accusation. That night, Mama Grace cried herself to sleep, and I sat awake in my chair, listening to her sobs. Guilt twisted in my stomach like a knife. Anita, oblivious, continued with her life. She called often, laughing about small office victories, sharing stories of colleagues, recounting her commute. Each word she spoke was a dagger, reminding me of what I had put in jeopardy. The months passed, and the pregnancy became undeniable. Mama Grace, pale and weary, traveled to a distant village for much-needed rest. I stayed in the apartment, avoiding the eyes of the few neighbors who often stopped by to say hello. The city, once vibrant, now felt like a maze of judgment, shadows, and whispers I could not hear but imagine constantly. Then, it happened. The day that would destroy the fragile illusion of safety. Anita returned home unexpectedly, her flight delayed by a storm. She came in laughing, her bag slung carelessly over her shoulder, her mind full of trivial office victories. She entered the apartment and froze. Mama Grace was in the kitchen, turning away as though caught. Her hands trembled, her face as pale as chalk. I tried to intervene, to explain, to shield her from immediate disaster. But it was too late. Anita's sharp eyes noticed the change immediately. She looked at her mother, and then at me. What is going on?" she asked, her voice rising, her calm demeanor gone. Mama Grace's composure shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Anita. I am so sorry." The confession came in broken words, halting and stuttered, each one slicing through the room. Anita stepped back, disbelief freezing her expression. I felt my knees weaken, my heart pounding in my chest as the reality of what we had done crashed down around us. You, what?" Anita stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Her hands trembled as she held onto the edge of the table. The vibrant laughter I had loved was gone, replaced by horror, anger, and betrayal. I tried to speak. I wanted to explain. I wanted to apologize. But no words could undo the damage. No words could make this right. Anita ran from the apartment that night, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, echoing like a funeral march. She left without a word, leaving us in silence, a silence heavier than any storm. Mama Grace collapsed into a chair, crying, whispering apologies over and over. I sat beside her, silent, feeling the full weight of her actions pressing down on me. The guilt that had been a quiet companion now screamed, refusing to be ignored. Days passed. Anita did not return. Calls went unanswered. Friends avoided the topic. Word spread quietly through family channels, and though no one directly confronted us, I could feel the judgment hanging over my head, unrelenting. It was during these days that I began to understand the true magnitude of the tragedy we had set in motion. It was not just a mistake between adults. It was the destruction of trust, the shattering of love, the collapse of a family. And there was no way to repair what had been broken. Mama Grace, too, seemed to fade. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by the haunting awareness of what she had done. She became quieter, her steps slower, her laughter gone. The pregnancy, once a symbol of secret hope, now seemed like a curse, an unspoken reminder of the devastation we had caused. And I remained, trapped in a home that felt like a tomb, haunted by the memory of Anita's eyes the night she fled, by the sound of her footsteps disappearing into the dark streets of Lagos, by the weight of the secret that had destroyed everything I had loved. The days after Anita's sudden departure were the longest of my life. The apartment, once filled with laughter and small comforts, had transformed into a cavern of regret. Every corner reminded me of what we had lost, the pictures on the wall, the coffee mugs, even the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Mama Grace stayed mostly in her room, her presence quiet and frail. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was in hushed whispers, as if confessing her sins to the shadows. I watched her slowly deteriorate, and I felt helpless, knowing that my own guilt had fueled this decay. I tried, in vain, to reach out to Anita. I sent messages, made calls, visited her workplace under the guise of concern, but she would not answer. Friends and family, too, had been pulled into the storm, choosing sides or stepping away entirely. The world I had once known now seemed distant, unreachable. Mama Grace's pregnancy progressed in isolation. She traveled to her village, claiming she needed rest, but the truth was far heavier than any explanation could carry. News traveled slowly in Lagos, but it did travel. Whispers reached the ears of distant relatives, and the weight of shame settled over her like a suffocating blanket. One evening, I received a call from a distant cousin. His voice trembled as he spoke. It's complicated. The baby, there were complications. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I asked, my voice hollow. The child didn't survive, he said softly, as if the words themselves were poisonous. Mama Grace, she's okay physically, but... I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't want to. The grief that had been building silently inside me exploded. I sank into my chair, feeling the enormity of what we had done. The mistake, the betrayal, the lies, they had culminated in this tragedy. When I finally returned to the village to see Mama Grace, I found her sitting on the porch, staring at the dusty roads, her hands folded in her lap. She looked older, thinner, and hollow-eyed. The warmth and energy that had once defined her were gone, replaced by a weary resignation. We did not speak at first. Words were unnecessary, grief had its own language. Eventually, she whispered, almost to herself, "It was all my fault. Mine, and yours." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "No, it was both of us," I said. I should have stopped it. I should have, everything." She looked at me, her eyes empty yet full of silent accusation. "It doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters." In the weeks that followed, Anita returned briefly, but only to confront the reality of what had happened. She was a ghost of the woman I had loved, her voice steady but cold. "I cannot forgive what has been done," she said. I cannot pretend that nothing happened. This changes everything." And then, without another word, she left. I watched her go, feeling the finality of it. The woman who had been my life, my hope, my love, was gone forever. The family I had been welcomed into, now fractured beyond repair. Mama Grace, the woman who had been a mother figure, a confidant, and a cautionary reminder, now lived in quiet penance, haunted by what had been lost. I remained behind, alone in a city that had once been full of possibility. The streets of Lagos felt empty, the sounds of traffic and chatter distant echoes of a life I no longer had. I walked through them aimlessly, searching for meaning in a world that had been stripped of joy. The tragedy of that time was not only in the loss of a child or the broken family, it was in the understanding that some mistakes, once made, cannot be undone. They reverberate through lives, leaving scars that never fully heal. I often returned to the apartments we had shared. I would sit in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of a life that no longer existed, and remember the faces of those I had loved and hurt. The memory of Anita's laughter, Mama Grace's soft admonishments, the fleeting moments of tenderness, they all lingered like ghosts. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I would hear the echoes of what could have been, and feel the weight of our choices pressing down, relentless and inescapable. Months had passed since the tragedy. Lagos, as always, moved with unrelenting speed, but my life had come to a standstill. The city thronged around me, the sounds of traffic, street vendors, the laughter of children playing in the dusty lanes, but inside, I was frozen in a perpetual winter of remorse. I had stopped going to work regularly. My friends avoided me, unsure how to address the scandal that had quietly spread through our social circles. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, their sympathetic eyes failing to mask judgment. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me, weighing, condemning, reminding me of the secret I had failed to keep and the lives I had destroyed. Mama Grace returned from the village, but she was a shadow of herself. Her face was pale, her posture frail, and her voice, once so commanding and warm, now trembled with fear and regret. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her words were soft, almost to herself. It was a mistake, everything was a mistake. I tried to comfort her, but comfort had no place here. The weight of our actions was not something that could be eased by words or gestures. We were prisoners of our own decisions, locked in a cage of guilt and shame. Anita never returned. I heard, through mutual acquaintances, that she had moved to another city, taking a job far away and severing all contact. I could not blame her. She had every right to disappear from the lives that had betrayed her so deeply. But that did not ease the hollow ache in my chest, nor did it lessen the sense of irreparable loss that consumed me each day. Life continued around me, but I felt no part of it. I walked the streets of Lagos like a ghost, observing families, lovers, and friends, but never connecting, never participating. Every smile I saw reminded me of what I had lost, every laugh echoed the betrayal, every child I passed made me flinch, haunted by the child we had lost before it even had a chance to live. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the high-rise buildings and painted the sky with crimson and gold, I found myself standing outside Mama Grace's modest home. She sat on the porch, staring blankly at the street, her hands folded in her lap. I had not spoken much to her in weeks, unable to find words that could bridge the chasm between us. She turned to me slowly, her eyes hollow yet brimming with sorrow. "Do you ever think," she whispered, "about what could have been? About how life might have been different if things had been different?" I shook my head. "I think about it every day," I admitted, my voice breaking. "But thinking doesn't change anything. We cannot undo what was done. We cannot fix it." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I fear," she said softly, "that this will follow us forever. That the shame, the regret, it will never leave." I nodded, unable to respond. Words were useless. We had both lost something that could never be regained: love, trust, family, and the fragile hope of a normal life. As the months turned into years, the distance between us and Anita grew insurmountable. Letters went unanswered, calls ignored, visits impossible. I occasionally heard from mutual acquaintances that she had rebuilt her life, but I never sought confirmation. I could not face her. I could not face the reminder of everything I had destroyed. Mama Grace and I continued to live under the same roof, yet there was a chasm between us deeper than any river. She existed like a statue, moving mechanically through the day, while I drifted through the rooms, lost in a haze of remorse. The tragedy had become our constant companion, a shadow that never lifted. One rainy evening, sitting alone in the darkened living room, I thought about the sequence of events that had brought us to this place. The choices, the weakness, the fleeting moment of indiscretion that had unraveled our lives. I realized that the tragedy was not simply in the loss of a child, nor in the departure of Anita, it was in the permanent fracture of trust, the collapse of relationships, and the haunting knowledge that we had caused irreparable pain to the people we loved most. I looked out the window at the streets of Lagos, slick with rain, lights reflecting in puddles like scattered stars. The city moved on, indifferent to my suffering. And I understood, with brutal clarity, that some mistakes leave scars that never fade. Some sins are not absolved, and some losses are permanent. Mama Grace passed quietly in her sleep a year later, a fragile woman worn down by grief and guilt. The funeral was small, attended only by a few relatives. I stood there, hollow-eyed, feeling nothing but the echo of a life destroyed and a family broken beyond repair. Anita never came. She never spoke to me again. The life I had once dreamed of, marriage, family, happiness, was gone. I wandered through Lagos alone, a man haunted by his own failings, carrying the weight of choices that could never be undone. And so, life went on. But for me, there was no joy, no hope, no light. Only the relentless shadow of tragedy, the memory of love lost, and the understanding that some mistakes are too great to forgive, too heavy to forget. I had learned, in the harshest way possible, that one moment of weakness could destroy a lifetime of happiness, and some consequences last forever.